Thanks everybody for coming out and for supporting LIBAA tonight. I think one of the most important things that we learned from our accident and the aftermath was the importance of being involved and the risks of being passive in our industry. You know, in so many ways we're under attack from the government and from the economy and from legislation that we really, it's important, and it's going to be one of the lessons that I'm going to try to ask you to listen for at the end. Any attack on any individual operator, company, pilot, or a whole industry is an attack on all of us. And we have to remain resistant to that, and we have to fight back. We learned to fight back in a way that we never expected to about 2.5 years ago. I'll just give in a nutshell what happened in case you haven't been reading Newsday all this time. If you have been reading Newsday all this time, you probably don't know the facts anyway. So I'll try to clarify some of what happened. On September 29, 2006, our company, in a brand new Legacy 600, was involved in a mid-air collision over the Brazilian Amazon with a Boeing 737-800. Sadly, all of the people on the Boeing perished. 154 men, women, and children crashed and died. And miraculously, 7 of us on the Legacy survived. I say miraculously because we've talked to the FAA, we've talked to the NTSB, and in the history of aviation, nobody has ever walked away from a high-altitude, high-speed mid-air collision. And fortunately, there's 7 of us who did. I was one of the 7 on the airplane. There happened to be 2 other people who are on the airplane here tonight, so I want to introduce them just for a second. Ralph Michelli, who's our VP Director of Maintenance, and Henry Yandel from Embraer. And we are joined forever by this event. There were 4 others, our 2 pilots, Joe Lepore and Jan Palladino, who spent 71 days against their will in Brazil after the accident. And we also had Daniel Bachman, who is a Embraer marketing executive, and Joe Sharkey, who was a reporter for the New York Times. We invited Joe Sharkey on the airplane because we wanted Acceler to get some publicity. So we certainly got some publicity. And we were hoping that Joe would be able to write stories about one of the brightest moments in our company, which was to take delivery of a brand new airplane. And instead he was a first-hand witness to some of our darkest hours. It turned out, and I'll tell you in a few minutes how, it turned out that his presence on that airplane and Daniel Bachman's were godsends to us, because they did things for us that we could never have anticipated we would need, but we needed desperately in the days and hours after the accident. So September 29, 2006, we had a very nice delivery ceremony. I don't know, has anybody here ever taken delivery of a new airplane from the factory? They try to make it a big deal. There's some kind of ceremony, celebration. And in every airplane delivery, there are fights, because the manufacturer is going to try to get you to make the wire transfer, sign on the dotted line. That's when they get the airplane off their books, and it's your liability. And what you wrestle about in the last couple of days before closing is the quality of the airplane. So we had a typical closing, and we put that all behind us on the day of the delivery, and we toasted the delivery. Our plan was to leave San Jose, which is the factory town, and fly to Manaus at the top of the Amazon, spend the night, do a little sightseeing the next morning, export the airplane from Brazil, and fly to Florida to import it to the United States. So after our celebration, we had a private luncheon, and we took off for Manaus. And it's mind-boggling to think of some of the things that happened on the airplane, but something I said to Henry just minutes before the accident, because it was a beautiful day to fly. It was smooth, the sky was clear, everybody was very relaxed in the airplane. I leaned over across the aisle to Henry and I said, you know, it just doesn't get any better than this. And a few minutes later, our world changed, as did the world of many other people. We felt an incredible jolt. We had no idea what the source of that jolt was, but it was something like I'd never felt, certainly on an airplane before. I was standing, and I wasn't even knocked over. Ralph was standing, he wasn't knocked over. But we immediately, instinctually went to our seats, not knowing what was to come. And Henry called out, we'd been hit. But he said that not really having seen any kind of impact or any collision with another airplane. It just was unimaginable that was anything else, and yet it was equally unimaginable that we could have hit another airplane at 500 miles an hour, 37,000 feet. So we looked out at the wing, and we saw that the winglet was sheared off. And you immediately are filled with thoughts. I mean, the first is your own survival. I know that my first thoughts were of my family and the fear that I would never see my kids again, and that they would probably learn of our deaths in just a horrible and intrusive way. I think that everybody on the airplane shared similar thoughts about their own fate, but also more importantly, since there was little we could do at the time regarding our own fate, we thought about the people that we were affecting on the ground. So we saw that the winglet was sheared off. We heard alarms coming from the cockpit. The autopilot had kicked off, and I believe it was Henry went up to the cockpit and Ralph and discovered that to maintain straight and level flight, the controls were deflected about 90 to 95%. We looked out at the wing. Also on top of the wing is a fist-sized hole. And for the next 35 minutes, from the time of the impact to the time that we landed at a remote military base in Brazil, we watched that hole, hoping and praying that nothing else would give way, that nothing else would threaten our lives. Every turn, every maneuver, we didn't know how badly damaged the airplane was. We knew it was severely damaged, but we didn't know was the next turn or the next decrease in power, was putting the landing gear out, was extending the flaps, were any of those things going to be the last thing that the airplane could endure. Compounding this was the fact that our Mayday call from Brazilian Air Traffic Control was unanswered. So you had all these elements in, and now we're descending blindly in airspace where something hit us with all these other factors. You know, I'm kind of jealous of the publicity that Sully gets. There's no question that he's a hero, and he saved the lives of a lot of people. And yet our guys, who were surrounded by the intense media and the lies of the Brazilian government, were made to look like criminals, when actually they flew this incredibly damaged airplane blindly in hostile terrain for 35 minutes and landed safely. To me, Joe and Jan are truly heroes, and will be forever indebted to their airmanship to having landed us safely in the military base. Well, we flew for 35 minutes, trying to keep Joe Sharkey entertained, trying to just keep it together. Ralph Michelli comes to the cabin and says, "I need to talk to you guys." So Henry and I came over and said, "What good news do you have for us now?" And he said that he noticed from the rear window that our tail was also damaged. So if you ever have a chance to look at a legacy, you'll appreciate the fact that where our tail was damaged and where our wing was damaged and where the winglet was sheared off, that for us, life or death was an inch, maybe less. Because I don't believe the wing could have sustained more damage. I don't believe that any further over on the tail would have done anything but knock that tail off, and we would have fallen out of the sky. And a foot in the other direction would have saved the lives of 154 people. People ask, you know, is the accident part of your life every day? And obviously it is when I talk to people, but it is every day, because I view, and I can't speak for the other gentlemen on the airplane, but I suspect they share my view, that every day since that day is a gift. You know, we had another birthday that day. That's our September 29th is our second birthday. And, you know, for people who have this kind of experience, I can't tell you that it's had a miraculous, sudden, life-changing impact on me. Or I think the other guys, I'm not sure, but I think we just try to do better every day, and try to use that gift for something positive. So after a 35-minute ride down to the jungle to this remote military base I keep referring to, called Kashimbo, where, as it turns out, we learned that it was the site of some nuclear testing some years before. We landed. We finally had contact with air traffic control in Brazil at the tower. They had about a minute of warning that we were going to be landing. We descended 50, 75 feet over the treetops, very inhospitable terrain, just hoping that the airplane stayed airborne and flying until we could actually touch down safely. We had a great landing. It was a little fast, but that's okay. Brakes got a little hot, that's okay. We were told to sit and wait for the brakes to cool off a little bit. We pulled up on the ramp, and we're staring into the wide eyes of dozens of Brazilian military who were there for reserve duty, just doing exercises. And certainly the last thing they ever expected to see was a U.S. business jet landing with little to no warning. Fortunately, I guess their air defenses aren't that strong, because I imagine in other places we might not have been received as well if we even made it to the ground in one piece. So that began the start of the next part of our adventure. We still didn't know what happened. We wouldn't learn about what happened to us for about 3.5 hours after we landed. So the first order of business was to sort of negotiate our way onto the base and to try to explain what brought us there without any warning. This is where one visitor on the airplane came in handy. That was Daniel. Because Daniel Bachman, who Embraer asked us to carry with us because they said as long as we're in their country, they felt we were their guests and they wanted to ensure our safety. He was our only Portuguese speaker. So he could communicate with the base commander and with the military locally and with his office. I don't even, landing at this base, which had very limited communications, I don't even know how we would have communicated to the outside world to tell them what happened and to try to muster some help. So Daniel had all the numbers, obviously, of the Brazilian, of the Embraer executives, and he could communicate our needs and about what happened, and he could communicate that beyond, because we still didn't have immediate access to communications. Our cell phones didn't work. We would have needed satellite phones, and we had limited access to the base phones and to base internet. Compounding that was that worst case scenario, it was a Friday night. You couldn't be more remote on a Friday night in a place where they don't speak your language or you don't speak their language, and you have virtually no way to communicate. So there were a lot of things stacked against us, and we were fortunate to have Daniel aboard the airplane. They made accommodations for us, and it's little things that catch your ear. As they were taking us to the dorm, one of the gentlemen who was an English speaker said, "That's the infirmary over there." And, a trauma like this, you never know what could happen, but, it's there. We all thought, looked at each other and thought, why would we need, we're safe and sound, we're fine. Well, within a half hour, Daniel had a medical emergency. He has a heart condition for which he did not have his medication. And I guess the stress of events triggered an episode of his problem. So we help him walk to the infirmary, and we watch him, white as a ghost, thinking conflicting thoughts. I mean, they're both the same thoughts. They're about everything turning out well. But the first thought is, oh my God, I hope he's going to be okay. And the second thought is, oh my God, if he's not, we're screwed. Because he's the means of communication. He's the tie to everybody. Fortunately, they had the medication he needed because we're a 3-hour drive from the nearest town. So I don't know that he could have gotten help for what was going on. We got him back. We settled in. We still didn't know what happened, but we were told that early the next morning that we would be flown out of the base, brought back to San Jose, the factory town, and be able to fly home.